Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they are released. Today's film we're talking about is a big one. The long-awaited sequel to Gladiator, Gladiator 2, which is of course directed by Ridley Scott and stars Paul Mescal, Pedro Pascal and Denzel Washington. So one of the last big blockbuster releases of 2024 is here, in Gladiator 2. A film that, in my mind, didn't need to be made, in the sense of, when you talk about films that do not need sequels, Gladiator 2 is absolutely one that falls into that category. I talked about that recently, about a month ago, when I talked about Joker, about films that do not need a sequel, because they have a great one and only entry, and that's all it needs. It's a story that starts well, and a story that ends in a fitting and well rewarding way. Gladiator 1 kind of is the pinnacle of that, of a one and done film. The first film, of course, starring Russell Crowe, of course directed by Ridley Scott, and around the time of the millennium, being released in 2000. The first Gladiator is one of those films that is a great hero story, and is a film that really... it is like an open and shut case. It is a film that sets out its stall and does everything it goes for almost perfectly, in a way that not many films, and certainly films around that time, did in that kind of subgenre of action fantasy drama film. And with Gladiator 1 holding such a special place in my heart when it comes to films, and certainly films of that era, I never really wanted there to be a sequel for this. However, Gladiator 2 gets announced. We hear Paul Mescal is involved, Pedro Pascal, Denzel Washington, Connie Nielsen's returning, and a lot of the core of the first film is there, no more so than Ridley Scott. And Ridley Scott as a director has been he's had an interesting time of it of late, because literally just this time a year ago we were talking about Napoleon, a film I was very excited for, a film that of course starred Joaquin Phoenix and had, from the trailers looked like it had the epic scale and had, funny enough, the battles and the action side of things that was so great that Ridley Scott had showcased all those years ago in the first Gladiator. However, Napoleon really didn't stick the landing, and while the action scenes in Napoleon were great, and were the standout of that film, narratively that film is all over the place. And really, it wasn't one that I found effective in any way to what it wanted to be, as a story being told. But yes, the action stood out. And my worry going into Gladiator 2 from that was, well, Ridley Scott can certainly still direct the action side of things and the big fantasy battle side of epics. That can still be done, no doubt about that. And he actually, in a way, he's probably never been better than ever. Or he's probably better than ever in a way that he brings those to the big screen. But my worry about Gladiator 2 was the narrative. My worry was the story of the first film is so, as I say, open and shut. To reopen this into another narrative that doesn't just become pandering and copy and just become a worse echo of the first film. That was my biggest worry going in Gladiator 2. And of course, not to harken back because they're very different films, but only a month ago I'm talking about a film that did not need a sequel and went in a very different direction in Joker Folie à Deux, and not to great effect, let's say. In Gladiator 2, I'm very, very happy to say I thought this was a great sequel. A sequel that earns its keep, and a sequel that honestly surprised me in a lot of ways. Because let's be real, Gladiator 2 has a lot of what you would expect. The action side of things, the vengeance for his father, yes, that is there, and that basis is there as you would expect. But the plot beats and the narrative, while I don't think that Gladiator 2 is as strong of a narrative as the first film, it certainly isn't. I think the first script is so tight-knit and so well done. The differences that Gladiator 2 has are very welcome ones, and the different directions it goes in, because yes, a lot of the, what you would say, bookends of the film and a lot of the plot points do echo moments from the first film, but it kind of goes back to, and if you've been on the channel for a while, you'll have heard me say this countless times, but my whole thing with sequels is A good sequel should celebrate the film it's following. Not copy it, but also not deter from it. When I talked about Folie à Deux, it deterred and it made me want to watch the original film less. When I think about other not so great sequels that just become a copy, you go, it's just exactly the same but worse. In Gladiator 2, this made me appreciate the first film so much more. Not because this film is bad, because that is absolutely categorically not the case. Gladiator 2 is great. But it gave me even more of a reinvigorated appreciation for the first film. And I only revisited it not that long ago. I did a video on TikTok of talking about what's so brilliant about the first film. How it's such a staple of that era and that time period. But also, it's just a brilliant film that has so much more on a rewatch, and it also has more of a nuance than you would think. But what Gladiator 2 has, and I think this is something I really hoped after seeing something like Napoleon that Ridley Scott would incorporate, is let's ramp up the action side of things. Let's ramp up the battle, and let's bring it to a larger scale. Because actually, in quite a funny way with the first Gladiator, it's yes, of course, there's the battles in the Colosseum, but it's quite a personal vendetta. It's quite a personal mano-a-mano kind of attack on each other and vengeance story. And yes, there's a lot of those elements in here. But what Gladiator 2 does in a brilliant way and sets its stall out very early is it brings the scale of Rome and the Roman Empire and these kind of rivaling empires surrounding that area and that vicinity. And the opening battle, and I talked a lot about this when I talked about the first film, the opening battle really sets the tone, and Gladiator 2 does exactly the same, but in a different way. Gladiator 2 has another brilliant opening battle, but what it does do, it expands us into this bigger world, if you like, and this kind of, so it's not just the Romans and it's not just Rome, it is kind of a continental issue, and it's these kind of wartime battles that are encompassing everybody from everyday life, not just Rome and the surrounding area, but that whole country, if you like, and bigger, even into the different continents. And that was something that sets, as I say, it sets it all out very early to do that. It very early sets Paul Mescal's character, his devotion to his wife, and the dynamic there. And honestly, Paul Mescal is an actor that, when I heard the Gladiator 2 had been announced, and he was taking up the shoes of, and mighty big shoes, of Russell Crowe in that role, you think, well, I hope he's ready for it, because this is a big task. Paul Mescal was up to the task. Paul Mescal is not the most charismatic actor, but in this role you don't need to be. What he needs to be is stoic, what he needs to be is strong, and what it needs to be is have that kind of conveyance of inner strength and inner determination in such a way that Russell Crowe did so well in the first film. Because it is not a charismatic role, and it is not a role that is, this is how I'm feeling right now. I don't like this. Everything is subtle, and everything is, again, that word nuances. A lot of it's on that. And honestly, Paul Mescal does a brilliant job. As does Pedro Pascal as his kind of counterpart in the film. And of course, there's twists and turns throughout the movie that, subvert your expectation, which I liked a lot. I didn't, the big thing of going into Gladiator 2, you want to get a lot of what you would expect. The battles, a few pop beats that harken back to the first film, yes. But what you want is a bit of, let's see what the new direction they take it in. And while Pedro Pascal certainly adds to that, the biggest difference from the first film to this, and the biggest addition, as he is in so many films, is Mr. Denzel Washington. And what a performance this is from him. And, at this point, talking about Denzel Washington give it a good performance is like saying water's wet. It is such a common thing. And in most films he's in, he is always either the standout or one of the standouts. In here, he is the joint standout, of course, with Paul Mescal in the lead. Denzel Washington is the absolute man. What an actor. What a career. And to still be putting on this level of performances, this level of charisma, because I talked there about the lack of the charisma. not by his own choice, but by the narrative and by the script that Paul Mescal has to have in the situation he's in, and kind of be, as I say, the stoic character. Denzel Washington is the charisma. And he's the charm, and he brings kind of the whole narrative in so many ways. You know, when you talk about so many films like this, you've got your lead character, and if they don't work, the narrative doesn't work as a whole. Honestly, if Denzel Washington's performance also doesn't work here, this movie falls apart. But, like he does basically every time he's in a movie or he's given a performance, Denzel Washington delivers, and delivers in spades. That, once you see him really chewing up the scenery and really getting into the performance, and as the movie goes, and his dynamic between him and Lucius, played by Paul Mescal in this main role, the dynamic is so good. And it was a film that I kept going throughout it. I kept thinking to myself, because obviously the first act, as I said, this big battle scene and kind of setting the tone of the story of where we're going to go and where this is going to lead to. I thought to myself, this is a really good opening. I hope it's not going to lose its way, because I remembered, and I know I keep harkening back to it, but when I talked about Napoleon, and I remember that film, it starts really strong too, and it completely falls off a cliff, narratively. Gladiator 2 does not, because it is paced well. It isn't paced just as well as the first film, and as I say, narratively, it probably isn't as strong. Actually, it isn't as strong as the first film, but there's other points, and I mentioned there about like the epic side of things, the battle side of things. This film is stronger in that way than the first, because the second film has some amazing action set pieces, particularly in the Colosseum, but also in the opening battle, and kind of throughout the film there was these great fight scenes, these great battle moments, and that was something that I thought, and it really kind of came across to be how much I was really enjoying how different Gladiator 2 is to Gladiator 1. And honestly, you could go into this, it all depends on your perception, I suppose, because you could go into this and go, oh, well, that's a bit like the first one, that's like the first one, that's like... And you could do that to the cows come home. You could do that forever. But there is so much here that takes it in new directions that made me enjoy this so much. I really did. I enjoyed Gladiator 2 so much. And honestly, I kind of went into this film... I went into this film going, it's never going to be anywhere near as good as the first film, because it can't be. And honestly, while it isn't as good as the first film, let's get that very clear, because the first film is a classic, the first film is iconic, and the first film is one of those movies that is kind of a staple of that time period. As I say, around the millennium, that is a movie that everybody would think of about being released that year, or that around that time. Gladiator 2 doesn't totally try to improve on what the first film is. Again, I use that word. It feels like a celebration of what was brilliant in the first, and it takes it in new and interesting ways into a second film with new characters that, yes, albeit have a lot of the similar feel. And it feels, if you go in thinking, and again, I don't want to keep giving this comparison and keep doing this kind of yin and yang, because they are very different. But when I talked about Joker Folie à Deux very recently, it, as a sequel, kind of felt like to spite the people that enjoyed the first film. It's a complete chalk and cheese to the first film. It's completely opposite film, and yes, maybe the through line, there's a little bit of it there that feels the same, but all in all, they're very different. Very, very different. Gladiator 2 is very, very like Gladiator 1. And that is not in a copying way, it's not in a pandering way, and it is not in a way that makes you feel, oh, well, I mean, it was okay, but I just watched the first one. The first one is better. But if you wanted a Gladiator sequel, again, I'm not someone who did want a Gladiator sequel, but now we have it. I don't know that it could have been much better or much more enjoyable than Gladiator 2 is, because of the performances, and not only by the main two I've talked about there, but Paul Mescal and Denzel Washington, but yes, Pedro Pascal, who, again, I mean, he is in so many things nowadays, from The Mandalorian to Last of Us. He's going to be in the Fantastic Four. That man is everywhere. But I'm yet to see him be... I'm yet to see him not be great in a film, or in a project, or in anything. He's a great addition to anything he's in, whether it's in a lead role or an additional role, like this feels. But other performances in here. Connie Nielsen, after all these years, to come in and give a performance honestly, I think she's better in this than she is in the first one. I think she brings a lot more heart and a lot more emotion in her performance to this one, and she's more established as an actress now, and for it to be, 24 years, and for her to give a performance that actually improves on what she did in the first. Well, again, she's not a main character in either films. She is certainly a key part. I was very impressed with her. But there wasn't really anybody, even Joseph Quinn in this kind of twin emperor dynamic, who are, by the way, utterly detestable throughout the whole performance and the whole movie. The two emperors in this, in the same way, and again, you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's just similar. It is similar to how utterly detestable Joaquin Phoenix's performance as the Emperor in the first film, or the stand-in Emperor, and that's how these feel too. These kind of unworthy heirs to the throne, even though they aren't heirs. These twin emperors, they're like if Fred and George from the Weasleys in Harry Potter were absolutely unbearable and were emperors of Rome. That's how it feels. And the dynamic between the two of them, you kind of had to laugh at some points they're just so over the top, but not in a way that detracts from the film, and not in a way that makes you go, okay, that's a bit cheesy, that's a bit cartoonish. Not at all. I thought they were a great addition, and they were very much someone you go, I can't wait till you get your comeuppance. And that's what the first film did so well, and yes, it did better. It did it better with Joaquin Phoenix, but it does it well here too, and that can't really be understated either. But I could talk about all that stuff, but honestly, Gladiator 2 surprised me just how much I enjoyed it, and how much it was different enough, but it also celebrated what was so great about the first film. And it had that real happy medium of what a sequel should be. A celebration, but a different direction in a good way. Not a different direction where it's completely... It almost opposes what came before. But in a way that just celebrates everything and makes me want to revisit the first one again, and then maybe watch the two of them back to back. And yes, there's things you'll go, okay, well, the first film was a lot stronger here in that point. As I say, particularly maybe the narrative and the story is a bit more airtight than Gladiator 2 is. But then the epic battles and the kind of grander scale, I would say, that Gladiator 2 feels, you know, there's pros and cons for both. Or maybe not even pros and cons, because there isn't much that I can say I didn't like in either film. I loved the first one, of course. And I really, really enjoyed this as a sequel. I thought this was a worthy sequel. And so many sequels that get made after all these years, you go, okay, it's just a cash grab, or it's just, right, they're going to find, they're out of ideas, so they'll just, what have we still not made a sequel for? Oh, I know, Gladiator, let's do that. I thought it might be that, I'll admit. When I first heard that Gladiator 2 was being made, I quite cynically thought, this could be just a cash grab, this could be, you know, let's just... We can't think of any new kind of swords and sandals kind of films. Let's do this. And it really isn't. It's a worthy sequel. And you can't always say that. Particularly in movies that have, 24 years in the making gap for a sequel. Gladiator 2 is great. And I really enjoyed it. And again, there's a lot of things that it takes from the first. And another thing that it takes well, of course it's the same score, it's the same man, and Harry Gregson Williams, I believe it is, with the score. That iconic score from like the closing scene of the first film, that echoes throughout this film, but not in a way that is, nostalgia baiting or member berries or anything like that. I just really enjoyed Gladiator 2, guys. I thought it was a film that... I had hoped it would be good, but I wasn't totally optimistic. But I'm happy to say I was pleasantly surprised. pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed this. It is definitely one of the biggest and most enjoyable blockbusters of the year, and Gladiator 2 is great. So, with all that being said, let's get to rating time. For context, the first film for me is a 9.5 out of 10. It is such a brilliant film. It's one of my favourite films of the year 2000. It's one of my favourite films of the early 2000s as a whole. And it's just a great movie. The second film, as you can see, IMDb has been kind enough to it, but not seem to enjoy it half as much as I have. For me, Gladiator 2 gets a very worthy 9 out of 10, and it will undoubtedly be one of my favourite films of 2024. Gladiator 2 is a worthy sequel. It is a great celebration of both the first film and these kind of films as a whole. It is a return to form for Ridley Scott after quite a few misses there. I know there's been a few hits, but there's been quite a few misses for a while now for Ridley Scott. And I was just... I really, really was so impressed with how much they did right in Gladiator 2. And I didn't... And again, maybe this is down to me being too cynical before the film had even came out. But it did feel like... What have we not made a sequel to? Okay, let's just make Gladiator. But no, there's a lot of care, a lot of love, a lot of passion for this project, and that shone through from the performances, to the direction, to the scale of the battles throughout it, through the epic size of it, to the score throughout it, everything. Gladiator 2 is a great, great time. It's a film that if they said to me years ago, they're going to make a Gladiator 2, this is as good as I would have hoped it could be. And for that, I can't knock it at all. A great and enjoyable time, and certainly a movie you should definitely take the time to see in a cinema, because it's one of those movies, there's been a few this year, and this falls in that category for sure, movies that need to be seen on the big screen. To be experienced on the big screen is probably the better term, because the surround sound and everything to do with movies of this nature, these large battle scenes, they deserve to be seen in an epic scale on a big screen, and I would recommend you definitely take the time and do that. So yeah, that has been my review for Gladiator 2, a sequel I never thought was ever going to come, not that I wanted it, and now it's here. A film I actually quite loved a lot. I thought there was great things in here, and yeah, maybe these sequels aren't too bad after all. Yes, there's been a few stinkers, but there's been a few good ones. In particular this year, we've had sequels to movies that, have been, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years in the making, some of them? I mean, next week, we have a film that's a prequel after, nearly 100 years? So, it all boils down to, if the people involved care about what they're making, and they have a real passion for it, and that translates to screen, and it's not a cash grab, these films can turn out pretty damn good. And that's the case with Gladiator 2. And yeah, that's been my review. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day listening to me talking about yet another movie. It's been a very busy year of film. It's been a great year so far for film. There's been highs, there's certainly been lows. There's been a good lot of stinkers. There's been some real bad movies, but there's been some real great ones too. And there's been quite a great level of quality kind of month to month. We've had at least one or two great films nearly every month for all of 2024, and let's hope that continues all the way to the end. Shameless plug a little bit here just before you go. TikTok, I'm very active on there, a lot more active than I would be on YouTube. YouTube, of course, as if you've been here for a while, you'll know that's the biggest releases, and Gladiator 2 certainly falls into that category. But other movies that maybe haven't garnered the same kind of interest or the same kind of hype, but I still want to talk about, TikTok's the place to find that. If you want to see any and all of my reviews, they're all logged and letterboxed. Follow me over there. Okay, shameless plugs out of the way. If you want to follow me on those, I appreciate you so much. If you're just here for this video, thanks for watching it. If you did enjoy, leave a like and subscribe if you want to stick around. And if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.